Roman writers treated gladiators as a business long before they treated them as heroes. A gladiator school looked like a training ground, yet it functioned like a market with walls. Ashur is our lens for this system, not because his name sits neatly in the record, but because his role absolutely did. Men like him ran fighters the way other Romans ran cargo, with contracts, schedules, and controlled risk. Gladiators lived inside a managed household troupe, and the owner held legal power over the stable he controlled. That means the real question is not who fought bravely on a given day. The real question is who engineered the conditions that made fighting inevitable. If you want to understand Ashur, you start where Rome always started. You start with a deal. Ashur does not begin as a trainer in any romantic sense. A Lanista begins as an operator who turns risk into revenue. Every meal, every drill, and every bruise sits on a ledger. Fighters are organized as a household troupe, and the school runs like inventory with names attached. Status does not protect the Lanista because his trade is often treated as socially tainted even while he handles elite money. Power does protect him because he controls access to the spectacle that sponsors and politicians need. Profit defines him because rent, sale, and reputation all move through his hands. Once you see that, the next question gets sharper. Where did the bodies come from in the first place? Rome did not run out of men, and it did not run out of desperation. Prisoners of war, enslaved people, condemned criminals, and volunteers all fed the schools in different proportions across time and place. Free volunteers existed, yet volunteering rarely meant dignity, because it meant surrendering status for cash or survival. A Lanista could buy cheaply and train hard, or buy skilled and pay more upfront. Scarcity shaped strategy because a rare style or a crowd favorite could justify a higher price. Geography mattered because provincial markets and city markets did not behave the same way. Reputation mattered because a school known for producing winners could charge more for appearances. None of this runs on inspiration. It runs on intake. That leads to the next piece of the machine. What exactly did a fighter sign into? Rome did not need myth to bind a gladiator because law did that job. A volunteer entered through a contract that formalized submission to the school. A fighter also swore an oath that spelled out what would be endured, from restraints to beating to the sword itself. Those words were not written to sound dramatic. They were written to make the business enforceable. Ownership defined movement because housing, food, training, and scheduling were controlled inside the walls. Debt reinforced that control because gear, penalties, and favors could all be priced. Compliance was not requested. It was contracted. Once the contract locks, the next question is brutal and practical. How did Ashur put a number on a life? A Lanista could lose money the moment a gladiator became disabled. A sponsor of games could compensate a school for a fighter who died while on lease, because death ended future earnings. Risk had a price, and pricing shaped decisions. Survival mattered when a fighter was expensive and marketable. Death mattered when a festival demanded a hard edge and the sponsor could afford the cost. Replacement mattered when novelty sold faster than long careers. Reputation mattered because it turned a body into a brand that traveled ahead of the next event. Medical bills mattered because healing could preserve a revenue stream. Every outcome had a financial shadow. Once you accept that, you see the next layer. How did Ashur keep control inside a school built on fear? A Ludus was not simply a gym, it was a closed world with rules designed for compliance. Segregation made fighters easier to manage and harder to unite. Dependence made them predictable because food, safety, and future all flowed from the same gatekeeper. Punishment created rhythm because a system runs smoother when consequences are automatic. Incentives created hope because hope can keep people working longer than chains. Isolation protected secrets because leaks threatened reputation and revenue. Routine wore down resistance because monotony breaks pride. Violence stayed in the background as the final guarantee. Control was never just physical. It was administrative. Once the school is stable, the Lanista can invest with confidence. That brings up a question that sounds strange until you follow the money. Why would Ashur pay for doctors? A gladiator was valuable only if he could perform on schedule. Treatment reduced downtime, and downtime was lost income. Care protected the investment because a recovered fighter could be leased, sold, or showcased again. Wound management also protected image because crowds paid for performance, not for limping. Diet and regimen mattered because they produced reliable bodies on command. Medical staff mattered because they stabilized a high-risk workforce. Pain was not the problem, unpredictability was the problem. In that sense, the infirmary was part of the business model. Once fighters are repaired, the next move is the one the crowd sees. How did Ashur decide who fought whom? Roman games sold the illusion of pure chance. Behind the curtain, pairings were designed to produce a result that felt satisfying. Styles mattered because a good match created drama without destroying valuable assets too quickly. Experience mattered because a rookie could be built, protected, or sacrificed depending on the plan. Timing mattered because a festival had pacing, not just fights. Optics mattered because a fan favorite had to look strong even in a narrow escape. Losses could be managed because a controlled defeat can keep a brand alive. Wins could be shaped without becoming obvious because obvious kills the market. The Lannisters' goal was not fairness. The goal was repeatable excitement. Once that framework exists, an uncomfortable question appears. How much money tried to push those outcomes from the outside? A spectacle with uncertain outcomes invites side money. Side money invites pressure, and pressure looks for the weakest point. Patrons could lean on organizers, and organizers could lean on schools. Fighters could be threatened, bribed, or trapped through debts and private leverage. Staff could be targeted because small decisions can change big results. Rumor can move crowds because rumor moves confidence. Corruption does not need to be universal to be influential. It only needs to be believable. A Lannister who survives learns to navigate that weather. When money starts pulling on the arena, another craft becomes essential. How did Ashur manufacture a champion? A champion did not emerge only from talent. A champion emerged from a sequence the crowd could follow. Narrative mattered because people return for stories more than statistics. Visibility mattered because a face seen often becomes a name remembered. Controlled risk mattered because a star has to look tested without being destroyed. Rivals mattered because an enemy makes a hero legible. Scheduling mattered because momentum can be built like a campaign. Even defeat mattered because a narrow loss can be a better advertisement than an easy win. The Lannisters sold the feeling of inevitability. Once a star exists, elite attention follows. That creates a new question with higher stakes. Who did Ashur answer to when powerful people wanted a piece of his stable? Games were tied to politics because sponsors used spectacles to display generosity and power. That meant a Lannister was always one handshake away from influence and one mistake away from ruin. Access to good fighters became a currency in elite relationships. Negotiation became survival because refusing the wrong request could close doors. Compliance became dangerous because agreeing too often could invite predation. Information became leverage because elite weakness is valuable in any era. Timing became political because festivals and public moods mattered. Reputation became protection because a school trusted to deliver a great show stayed in demand. The Lannister lived between the crowd and the class that fed the crowd. In that position, the most valuable commodity was not a sword arm. It was knowledge. So what kind of information could destroy Ashur overnight? A Ludus runs on secrets that never appear on the poster. Contracts, debts, injuries, and private agreements live behind walls for a reason. A Lannister who knows a fighter's limits can price him correctly and protect his investment. A Lannister who knows an organizer's desperation can raise fees at the exact moment it hurts most. A Lannister who knows a patron's scandal can demand favors without saying the word demand. Leaks break everything because they turn private leverage into public risk. Betrayal becomes expensive because it invites retaliation and scares future partners. Records become dangerous because paper can outlive loyalty. Spies become normal because competition rewards whoever hears first. Once information turns into a weapon, the last scene writes itself. What does the final ledger say about a man like Ashur? Ashur survives in this story as the personification of a Roman role built on controlled brutality. Lannister power came from turning human risk into a product elites could buy and crowds could crave. Contracts set the cage, training sharpened the asset, and medicine kept the asset rentable. Matchmaking protected value while preserving drama. Politics provided demand, and demand invited pressure and corruption. Information held the whole structure together like mortar. Once public risk outweighed private profit, the system did what systems do. It removed the liability and replaced it with a new operator. If you want a part 3 that follows the paper trail further into contracts, status, and how freedom was priced, subscribe and stay with the series. Drop a comment telling me which part of the machine mattered most to you, the contract, the medicine, or the politics.